Grand Master Luke Skywalker had become a living legend, an incomparable titan who transcended the limits of what was believed possible for a Jedi. Decades of brutal battles against the remnants of the dark side had molded him into a perfect weapon, relentless and devastating. His green saber cut through the darkness like lightning, and his connection with the Force was so deep that he could sense disturbances in the galaxy before they even happened. He had hunted and destroyed countless servants of the dark side, from the dark side prophets to the fearsome reborn Sith. Each victory was a mark on his relentless journey to maintain peace. Each enemy fallen under his controlled fury was proof of his absolute supremacy. His list of conquests was terrifying to anyone who dared follow the path of darkness. His power had grown so much that some whispered he surpassed even the ancient Jedi Masters, perhaps equaling or exceeding the unrealized potential of Anakin Skywalker himself. But even with all these crushing victories, Luke felt a persistent emptiness that no battle could completely fill. The galaxy was at peace, but the weight of lost lives, the sacrifices made, and the darkness that always threatened to return haunted him silently. Seeking answers that conventional meditation could not offer, he traveled to the unknown regions, following ancient rumors about a forgotten Sith temple on the edges of known reality. This temple, it was said, was a nexus of raw power where the Force manifested visions for those brave or foolish enough to seek them. Luke entered the shadowy chambers without hesitation, his saber deactivated but always ready. His senses expanded to capture any hidden threat in the millennial shadows. In the heart of the temple, surrounded by ancient Sith inscriptions that glowed with a sickly red light, Luke knelt and opened his mind to the Force in a way he rarely did. Immediately, visions flooded his consciousness with a brutal intensity that would have shattered a less trained mind. He saw a galaxy bathed in golden light, where the Empire had never been born, where children laughed on worlds that in his reality had been incinerated. He saw Anakin Skywalker not as the monster Darth Vader, but as the hero he should have been, training young Jedi alongside Obi-Wan Kenobi in a rebuilt temple. He saw Padme Amidala aging gracefully, surrounded by her children who grew up knowing both parents, living lives without the shadow of tyranny that defined his own existence. The visions became more intense, more visceral, showing billions of lives that could have flourished if only a different choice had been made. Luke felt the collective suffering of the galaxy he knew, each enslaved planet, each life extinguished by the Emperor's orders, each dream crushed by the iron hand of the Empire. Silent tears ran down his face as the magnitude of what had been lost manifested with cruel clarity. The Force was not just showing possibilities, it was showing what should have been the stolen destiny of trillions. He felt the pain of his mother he never knew, the torment of his father trapped in Vader's armor, the loneliness of his sister Leia growing up without knowing who she really was. Luke instantly understood what was being proposed, and his decision was made before conscious thought could fully process the magnitude of what he accepted. When he opened his eyes, the Sith temple had completely disappeared, replaced by something impossible and simultaneously familiar. Luke was standing on a high balcony, surrounded by the unmistakable architecture of Coruscant, but not the Coruscant he knew. This was the capital during the Republic, vibrant and full of life, without the scars of imperial domination etched into its structures. The sun shone differently, the air had a distinct smell, and when he expanded his senses in the Force, he felt millions of living presences, eager, hopeful, not yet crushed by the despair that would come. Speeders passed in organized formations. There were no stormtroopers patrolling the streets, and the echoes of the Jedi Order still resonated strongly throughout the entire planet. The realization hit Luke like a physical blow. The Force had not just shown visions, it had sent him back, through time itself, to an era he only knew through holograms and stories. He looked at his hands, still the same, still bearing the marks of decades of battles that technically had not yet happened. His lightsaber hung on his belt, a dangerous anachronism in this timeline. Luke briefly closed his eyes and felt the web of destiny around him, fragile and about to break in millions of different directions depending on his next actions. He knew exactly when he was, the final days of the Republic, when Palpatine still wore his mask of benevolent chancellor, when Anakin Skywalker was still a conflicted but not corrupted Jedi. The mission was clear with a brutal simplicity that cut through any philosophical consideration. He needed to destroy the seeds of the Empire before they germinated. That meant eliminating Palpatine, the architect of all suffering, but it also meant confronting a truth that made his heart heavy. If Anakin had not yet fallen, if he was still General Skywalker, hero of the Republic, then Luke would have to consider the unthinkable. His own father, in this timeline, could become an obstacle that would need to be removed if he showed signs of corruption. The Force had sent him here not just as savior, but as executioner, willing to do what the Jedi of this era could not: kill an enemy before he became invincible. Luke activated his communicator, but it was dead, incompatible with the networks of this era. Another reminder that he was completely alone on this mission. There was no New Republic to call, no ally who could understand where he came from or why he was here. He was a temporal anomaly, a ghost warrior from a dark future sent to assassinate the present. Breathing calmly, he began to walk through the streets of Coruscant, keeping his presence in the Force suppressed like an imperceptible shadow. Citizens passed by him without a second glance, unaware that one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy walked among them. His blue eyes, hardened by wars that had not yet happened, fixed on the direction of the Senate District, where the true enemy waited, ignorant of his imminent death sentence. The Chancellor's building rose against the Coruscant skyline like a monument to political power, its architectural lines designed to inspire respect and intimidation in equal measures. Luke jumped from the platform, using the Force to guide his silent descent to a service entrance on the lower levels of the complex. Each movement was calculated, each step a masterpiece of infiltration born from decades operating on the margins of the law when necessary to protect the galaxy. A pair of senatorial guards turned a corner directly in his path, and Luke did not hesitate. His hand extended, and both guards simply fell, instantly asleep by a Force trick that shut down their consciousnesses. As he climbed through the levels, approaching the executive floors where the Chancellor's office dominated the city view, the resistance increased proportionally. For elite guards blocked the entrance to the last corridor before Palpatine's personal office, armed with heavy blasters and clearly trained for extreme security situations. They saw him approaching and immediately raised their weapons, orders to stop and identify echoing through the corridor. Luke did not respond with words, only with action. His green saber ignited with that characteristic sound that had announced condemnation for countless enemies, and he moved. The guard on the right fired first, but the shot was deflected back with surgical precision. Luke spun, his saber tracing a bright green arc that cut through the blaster barrels of the other three guards before they could fire. One of the guards, demonstrating admirable courage, abandoned his useless weapon and attacked Luke with a vibrostaff. Luke dodged the blow almost casually, used the Force to lift the guard off the ground and threw him against the wall, where he slid unconscious. The two remaining guards retreated, finally comprehending that they faced something far beyond their capabilities. But Luke did not give them a chance to flee or call reinforcements. Two quick gestures with his free hand, and both fell paralyzed, trapped by invisible Force claws that kept them conscious but completely immobile. Luke extended both hands and the doors simply exploded inward, torn from their hinges by the brute force applied with violent precision. Fragments of expensive wood flew through the inner chamber, and Luke entered through the smoke and destruction like a nightmare apparition, his green saber casting dancing shadows on the walls. Palpatine was sitting behind his desk, and to his credit, he did not jump or scream when his door was destroyed. Instead, he simply looked up from his datapads with an expression of slight annoyance, as if violent invaders were a minor inconvenience in his busy schedule. "My young man," he began with that deceptively avuncular voice that had deceived generations. "Surely there are more civilized ways to request an audience with the Chancellor. If you have any complaint, I assure you." His words were abruptly cut off when Luke used the Force to grab him by an invisible throat and hurled him across the entire room, smashing him against the panoramic window with enough force to create cracks in the reinforced transparasteel. Palpatine fell to the floor, his mask of benevolent grandfather slipping for a moment to reveal pure and murderous rage beneath. He rose with an agility that betrayed his true nature, and his eyes narrowed as he finally really looked at his attacker. "You," he hissed. "You carry the dark side, but also the light, mixed in ways that should not be possible. "Who are you?" Luke did not respond with words, only fully activated his saber, the green glow reflecting in his determined eyes. Palpatine smiled, and it was a terrible smile that should never have touched human lips. "Ah, I understand now. A Jedi who thinks he can destroy me. How many of your masters have tried and failed, child?" Force lightning rays exploded from Palpatine's hands with an intensity that would have incinerated a lesser Jedi instantly, illuminating the entire office with blinding blue-white light. But Luke simply raised one hand, the left, and the rays stopped in the air, absorbed and dissipated by a force mastery that left even the Sith Lord momentarily stunned. "Impossible!" Palpatine whispered, genuine astonishment coloring his voice for the first time in decades. Luke took a step forward through the still flowing rays, completely unharmed. Terror, true and primordial, flashed through Palpatine's eyes for a fraction of a second before rage replaced it. He pulled a lightsaber from inside his sleeve, the red blade igniting with a roar of Sith fury, and he leaped over his desk directly toward Luke with supernatural speed. His first thrust would have killed lesser Jedi Masters, but Luke's saber was there to intercept it, green and red clashing in an explosion of energy. They separated and clashed again, and again, the sabers moving so fast they became solid color blurs. Palpatine was fast, incredibly fast, augmented by the dark side and decades of secret training, but Luke was something completely different. He was the culmination of generations of Jedi knowledge combined with combat experience that Palpatine would not live to acquire. Each of Palpatine's attacks was anticipated, each faint read before it was executed, and slowly, inexorably, Luke pushed him back. Palpatine's face began to show tension, then concern, then something dangerously close to fear as he realized that, for the first time in his long life, he was being completely dominated. He tried to retreat, tried to create distance to use more Force lightning or some other Sith technique, but Luke did not allow it, pressing his attack with a relentless aggression that left no room to breathe. And then, just as Palpatine prepared for a desperate attack, the destroyed doors of the office emitted another sound of destruction, and a new presence entered the room. Anakin Skywalker, the Chosen One, hero of the Republic, sensing danger, had arrived to save his Chancellor. Anakin Skywalker froze in the destroyed entrance, his blue saber already activated in response to the call of danger he had felt through the Force, and his eyes widened with absolute shock as he processed the scene before him. There was Chancellor Palpatine, the wise man who had guided and counseled him through the war's most difficult years, wielding a red lightsaber and clearly engaged in mortal combat against a Jedi Anakin had never seen before. Anakin's mind struggled to comprehend the impossibility of what he was witnessing. Chancellor Palpatine was a Sith? Everything he had fought for, all the advice he had followed, all the missions he had completed under his guidance, was it all built on a lie? But then Palpatine shouted, his voice carrying perfectly falsified desperation. "Anakin, this assassin came to destroy the Republic. He wants to kill Senator Amidala. You need to help me stop him." The mention of Padme was like an electric shock through Anakin's system, burning through his confusion and activating all his deepest protective instincts. Anakin launched himself across the room, his blue saber tracing an arc toward Luke that would have been lethal if it had connected. Luke felt his father's approach and his heart broke even as his body reacted by pure survival instinct, his green saber spinning to block Anakin's attack in the last possible second. Their sabers met with a crash of energy, and for the first time in history, Luke Skywalker crossed blades with Anakin Skywalker while both were still on the side of the light. Luke knew he could not seriously fight his father, not when Anakin was still on the side of the light, not when there was a chance to save him this time. But Palpatine had no such restrictions, and the Sith Lord took advantage of Luke's hesitation mercilessly, his attacks becoming bolder, more aggressive, targeting vital points with murderous intent. For a few precious seconds, Luke found himself genuinely pressed, forced to defend against two attackers while refusing to fully retaliate against one of them. The office became a whirlwind of green, blue, and red light, the three sabers creating patterns so complex they would have been indistinguishable to untrained observers. Furniture continued to explode, the cracked windows began to shatter, and the marble floor became marked with saber burns where errant attacks cut through the stone. Then something changed in Luke's expression, a decision being made behind those blue eyes hardened by war. He could not afford to prolong this, could not risk guards or other Jedi arriving and further complicating the impossible situation. With a roar that echoed with force power, Luke extended his free hand toward Anakin and released a telekinetic wave of energy so powerful it sent the Chosen One flying across the entire office. Anakin collided with the opposite wall with brutal force, the impact leaving a crater in the reinforced material, and he slid to the floor, stunned but conscious, struggling to regain the breath that had been expelled from his lungs. With Anakin temporarily neutralized, Luke turned his full attention to Palpatine, and the Sith Lord finally comprehended the full magnitude of his error. He was alone against something that transcended his understanding of power. Palpatine tried to counterattack, tried to use his supernatural agility to create distance, but Luke was always there, always one step ahead, always cutting off his options until nothing remained but growing desperation. Palpatine's red saber began to tremble under the force of Luke's strikes, the weapon struggling to contain the pure energy being channeled through repeated collisions. When Palpatine tried to spin into a surprise attack, Luke simply was not there, having moved with precognition that bordered on omniscience. Instead, Luke's green saber descended in a perfectly calculated arc that intercepted Palpatine's saber hilt, and the Sith weapon exploded in a cascade of components and shattered crystal. Palpatine stood there, disarmed for the first time in decades, his mask of political horror finally completely shattered to reveal the frightened monster beneath. "No," Palpatine whispered, staggering backward, his hands raised not in surrender but preparing for a final desperate attack of Force lightning. But Luke did not give him the chance. With two quick and brutally efficient movements, the green saber cut through both of Palpatine's legs just above the knees. The Sith Lord fell, screaming not from physical pain but from impotent rage, decades of meticulous planning evaporating in seconds of crushing defeat. He looked up, seeing Luke rise over him like an angel of judgment, and for the first time in his long and corrupt life, Palpatine, Darth Sidious, Sith Lord and almost Emperor, felt true and complete terror. "Wait," he began to plead, his voice losing all arrogance. "We can negotiate. I can teach you secrets that—" His words were cut off, literally, when Luke's saber descended in a final downward arc that separated Palpatine's head from his shoulders. The Sith Lord's body collapsed, and his head rolled a few meters before stopping, eyes still open in eternal shock. A profound silence descended upon the destroyed office, broken only by the hum of Luke's saber and the sound of labored breathing coming from where Anakin still recovered against the wall. Luke deactivated his saber and began to turn, ready to try to explain the situation to Anakin before more complications arose. But what he saw froze his blood. Anakin had managed to stand up, leaning heavily against the wall, and his face was a mask of anguish that transcended physical pain. Tears ran freely down his cheeks as he looked alternately at Palpatine's body and at Luke. He said he could save Padme. The sabers collided again, but this time Luke held back absolutely nothing, because the Anakin attacking him now was not the controlled Jedi Knight of moments ago, but a hurricane of raw emotion channeled through saber combat. The opportunity came when Anakin attempted an overly ambitious spinning attack, a technique that left his right side exposed for a fraction of a second. Luke's green saber descended with surgical precision, not targeting vital organs or the neck, but Anakin's mechanical right arm. The blade cut through the synthetic components as if they were paper, and the mechanical arm fell to the floor with a metallic crash, fingers still clenched around a saber that was no longer there. Anakin screamed, not from physical pain since the arm was synthetic, but from frustration and defeat, falling to his knees as his blue saber rolled away across the destroyed floor. He looked up, staring at Luke with a mixture of hatred, confusion, and something deeper. A silent question about who this mysterious invader really was and why he seemed so profoundly sad while defeating him. Before either of them could speak, the Force exploded with a warning, and Luke spun just in time to see a purple form explode through the destroyed entrance of the office. Mace Windu, Master of the Jedi Council and one of the Order's greatest duelists, had arrived, drawn by the massive disturbances in the Force and urgent reports of violence in the Chancellor's office. His eyes swept the scene in an instant. Anakin wounded on the floor, Palpatine's body, and an unknown Jedi with a green saber still active standing in the center of the destruction. To Mace, trained in decades of Jedi logic and quick conclusions, the image was clear, even if completely wrong. This stranger had attacked the Chancellor and wounded Anakin. "Step away from Skywalker," Mace ordered, his characteristic purple saber igniting with a sound that had announced justice for many who faced the Jedi Order's wrath. He assumed the opening stance of Form 7 Vapad, that controversial style that channeled the dark side itself against its practitioners, and Luke felt the resolute determination emanating from the Jedi Master like a tangible aura. Luke looked at Mace Windu, a man he knew only through stories and holograms, and felt deep respect for the warrior who refused to back down even in the face of impossible odds. But Luke needed to ensure the timeline was corrected, that the Empire would never be born, and that meant departing before more complications arose. He moved not to attack but to disarm and incapacitate, crossing the distance between them in an instant. Mace reacted with the speed for which he was famous, his purple saber spinning in a defensive Vapad sequence, but Luke simply used the Force, grabbing Mace with telekinetic power and throwing him sideways against the wall with controlled force, enough to stun but not to seriously injure. Mace hit the hard surface and slid down, struggling to maintain consciousness as his vision darkened at the edges. And then, as if summoned by thought itself, a tiny but immensely powerful presence entered the destroyed office. Master Yoda, Grand Master of the Jedi Order, had arrived. The small Jedi Master entered limping on his Jimmer stick, his ancient eyes sweeping the carnage with an indecipherable expression. He saw Anakin kneeling and mutilated, Mace fallen and unconscious, Palpatine's decapitated corpse, and finally, his eyes landed on Luke. For a long moment, neither of them moved, two Jedi Masters separated by decades, studying each other through the veil of the Force. Yoda could sense the power emanating from Luke, layers upon layers of experience and knowledge that should not be possible in someone apparently so young. There was something deeply familiar in this presence, echoes of something Yoda could not identify, but that resonated with meaning that defied logical explanation. Yoda activated his green saber, the small but deadly blade emerging with a sharp sound, and he assumed his characteristic combat stance, prepared to defend his fallen Jedi against this mysterious invader. "Powerful you are," Yoda said, his inverted syntax carrying the weight of centuries of wisdom. "But reckless action this was. Explanation you must give, or by the Order's justice answer you will." Luke looked at the small master who had been his teacher in another life, in a timeline that perhaps would never exist now, and felt an emotional knot that threatened to crush him. Then Luke did something that surprised even Yoda. He completely deactivated his lightsaber, clipping it to his belt with a deliberate movement that made clear he had no intention of fighting. He began to walk toward Yoda, not threateningly but with slow and measured steps, his hands open at his sides in a universal gesture of peace. Yoda did not lower his saber, but also did not attack, his confusion apparent in the wrinkling of his green forehead as he tried to understand what this stranger was doing. Luke stopped just a few meters from Yoda and, slowly, with a bow that carried decades of accumulated respect, he knelt before the current Grand Master, lowering his head in a position of complete vulnerability. "Master Yoda," Luke began, his voice low and urgent, calibrated by the Force so that only Yoda's sensitive ears could capture his words. "My name is Luke Skywalker, son of Anakin Skywalker and Padme Amidala. I come from the future, from a timeline where Palpatine became Emperor and destroyed the Jedi Order. I was trained by you, Master. The Force sent me back to prevent that dark future from happening. Palpatine was Darth Sidious, the Sith Lord who orchestrated the Clone Wars. I killed him to save the galaxy, to save my father from becoming a Sith, and to save billions of lives that would be lost under the Empire." Yoda stood completely still, his saber still active, but now trembling slightly as Luke's words reverberated through his ancient mind. He extended his senses deeply into the Force, probing Luke with a perception that had been refined by almost 900 years of existence, searching for any trace of deception or dark side corruption. What he found shocked him to the core. Truth, crystalline and undeniable, emanating from Luke like light from a star. More than that, he felt echoes of his own Force signature intertwined in Luke's power patterns, marks of training and philosophy that could only come from a genuine master-apprentice relationship. Unlikely, this is, Yoda whispered, but even as he said the words, he knew they were not true, because the Force did not lie to those who truly knew how to listen. Care for the Chosen One, Luke said softly, still kneeling, still vulnerable, trusting his life to Yoda's judgment. Please help him. Yoda looked at this Jedi from the future, this man who carried so much power and so much pain, and made a decision that went against 800 years of Jedi precedent. He deactivated his saber, clipping it back to his belt with a soft click that sounded like a sentence being suspended. Luke looked up, meeting Yoda's ancient eyes one last time, and he saw understanding, forgiveness, and something that could have been pride shining in those green depths. He opened his mouth to say something, to express gratitude, but before any words could form, the Force grabbed him again. The office began to disappear around him, the edges of his vision dissolving into bright white light, and Luke felt himself being pulled through time and space back to his own era. His last vision of Yoda was of the old master nodding his head slightly, a gesture of final recognition, and then everything exploded into total whiteness. Years later, when Luke Skywalker and Leia Organa grew up and eventually found their way to the rebuilt Jedi Order, Yoda observed them from afar with knowing eyes. He instantly recognized in young Luke Skywalker, now just a child full of potential and innocence, the relentless warrior who had traveled through time to save them all. Yoda never spoke to anyone about what happened that day in the Chancellor's office, keeping the secret locked deep in his heart. The official story recorded that Palpatine had been discovered as Darth Sidious and executed during an escape attempt, with Mace Windu receiving credit for the discovery. But Yoda knew the truth, and sometimes, when he observed young Luke training, he saw shadows of the master this boy would become in a timeline that would now never exist. And Yoda smiled, knowing that some stories did not need to be told to be true, and that the greatest heroes were often those whose sacrifices would never be known.